Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. All right, Steve. Hello. We were recording a new episode where we're going to do the second half of the comics in May 1967. We are rapidly approaching the expansion of Marvel Comics when we are going to have to rethink a little bit how this podcast works because we're going to have more than $9 a month. But for now, they are still just publishing 9 superhero books a month.
We've got a few different concepts we've been thinking about what we might do when the number of books expands, ranging from just slowing down and just doing these things much more slowly, or just focusing on a few books, or possibly leaving this time frame altogether and possibly talking about the comics of our youth, or following the writing exploits of an individual writer chronologically. These are all things that we've sort of thought about or discussed. So, dear listener, if you have any ideas or thoughts or preferences or any other ideas, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. You can always comment on the MarvelRereadClub.com blog where we have a post about every episode, or there's all sorts of ways you can reach us. You can go to our Facebook page at any time.
Or Blue Sky or Threads. That's right. We're on Blue Sky and Threads now, too. I don't know whether I mentioned that before.
I'm not sure I knew that.
Yeah, so Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook. We're mainly on Facebook, but we're on all those things now.
I didn't know that. Are we on X?
I never really got Twitter. I mean, even in the earlier halcyon days of Twitter, I never really quite got it. And as such, I don't really quite get Blue Sky either. But, I'm doing my best.
Well, okay. So Fantastic Four, number 62, and One Shall Save Him. We have Blastaar. So I had this false sense when I was a kid that Annihilus was the real Phantom Zone villain. Sorry, not Phantom Zone, Negative Zone. And this was true to a certain extent, that if you wanted the hardcore, real Negative Zone villain, you had Annihilus. And then if you wanted the sort of second, also ran Johnny-come-lately, you would have Blastaar. And I had not realized that Blastaar predated Annihilus, that the first real Negative Zone villain we get is Blastaar, who we get in this issue. And, the fact is, I love Blastaar. I don't know where I got this impression as a kid that he was second rate. He is awesome. And we meet him in this issue. As you recall, when last issue ended, Reed was stuck in the Negative Zone, drifting towards that exploding planet, which he will be drifting towards so many times in the future, every time he gets stuck in the Negative Zone. And Ben, Johnny, and Sue are trying to reach him on a very elaborate phone type system they have. And they succeed. They're talking to him. But he's like, just forget about me. I'm dead. There's no way you'll ever be able to rescue me. They are distraught, and they are so distraught. And this is great sort of unexpected behavior. They're so distraught that finally Crystal and Lockjaw show up. Finally, these two crazy kids are reunited for the first time since issue, I want to say 44. And it's all Johnny has wanted for all this time. And he doesn't even look up. He doesn't even look up to say hi to her because he's so distraught and his head stays in his hands where he's so worried about Reed. We have Lockjaw licking his lips while Crystal tries to let Johnny know that it's going to be okay. Then they go ahead and show her on their video monitor what's going on. And we get one of our first Marvel Comics 2-page spreads, and certainly our first 2-page photo collage spread. And it is awesome. We have
we have had some 2-page spreads before. I think in Thor we've had a shot showing us what all of Asgard looks like. That was a double-page spread, and that was a little while ago. So we've had some of that, but yeah, definitely the first photo collage 2-page spread. Personally, I don't like it too much. I think it's just because the photo stuff on here looks and feels very dated to me, which, I mean, obviously that's the technology they had to be able to reproduce this stuff, but it feels like stuff out of a 1950s catalog or something like that has been collaged together.
But I love that.
But that's me. I realize I'm going to be a minority opinion on that. But I do love how they got Reed shoehorned into the whole thing there.
But what you just described, a mid-century dated photo collage of things that look like 50s magazines, sounds awesome to me. And indeed, it is awesome. I just absolutely love this.
What I wonder about is how they got the halftone look on Reed. That does not look like Zipatone. That looks like actual like newspaper style halftone on Reed there. And whatever they did, that part is really, I find really impressive to go ahead and make him sort of blend in with the rest of it.
we get this beautiful thing. And then Crystal is like, you guys seem really depressed, and there's no reason to be. I'm one of the Inhumans. We can rescue anybody. And the Fantastic Four are like, oh, right. I guess you can probably rescue Reed. She goes off to teleport back to the Inhumans to see if she can find some help.
I assumed that she was just going to teleport into the negative zone with Lockjaw, grab Reed, and teleport right back. But no, there's a whole other elaborate thing that she goes about.
It would seem to make sense.
Yes.
But then,
okay, go on.
Meanwhile, we get this alien race inside the negative zone that is exiling, speaking of warlords, exiling their local warlord who they've wrapped up in a suit and attached to a asteroid. I think this was so much homaged in a very Kirby-esque episode of Superman the Animated Series, where they had a creature attached to an asteroid that was coming closer and closer to Earth. He's attached to an asteroid, and then we get a coincidence. And this isn't me talking, this is them talking. They're like, remember the coincidence we spoke of? In truth, it is far greater, far more momentous than any might suspect. For although completely unaware of another presence, Reed Richards clings faithfully to the selfsame boulder upon which the unknown menace now silently adheres. Which is like, okay, this is fine. This is a perfectly acceptable sort of coincidence. This is the sort of coincidences that make good stories. It is notably not a coincidence that helps the hero.
And it is a fantastic splash page here. I really, really like this.
Yes, with Reed not realizing that there is an evil enemy warlord adhered to the back of his boulder. Meanwhile, we get a bizarre sequence where Crystal has to go check on the Inhumans. Well, what are the Inhumans doing? They are stopping the invasion of a European island. Presumably, this is supposed to be like Greek separatists trying to take over Cyprus or something like that. And it's all very strange. You've got these guys in these orange and purple suits, orange and purple and red, although they've got sort of jaunty bandanas on.
What I took this as is this was just some uninhabited island somewhere off the coast of Europe that the Soviets were coming in to try to establish a beachhead on the edge of Western Europe. And, you know, their red bandanas that they've got around their necks might be a nod to that. But yeah, you're right. What you said would be equally as possible here.
Yeah, it's an odd situation, but the Inhumans handle it handily, and they defeat all of the invading army and put them in an electron field to keep them contained until they can do something about them. But then they're like, oh, wait, what do we do about their submarine? Isn't their submarine going to come attack us now? But then Triton is there and deals with the submarine in a very badass sort of way. Really nicely drawn sequence on page 12, where he...
Very nicely drawn.
Smashes his way into their submarine and sinks it, and looks more like a modern day comic in terms of the comics all try to look like action movies these days, and this actually looks like an action movie.
Sinnott has a large part of how good this sequence looks. He did a great job on this, on the scales on Triton there.
Oh, yeah. Sinnott loves scales. Or as you pointed out in the past, maybe he doesn't, but maybe he just feels a responsibility to do right by them. So then Crystal says, here's what's going on. She explains the situation to Black Bolt. It's like, who should help Johnny? And Black Bolt points directly to us, to the viewer. And it's like going, you know, he says, but he doesn't actually say. And we're like, and everyone's like, him? Of course, no one else could serve as well. And then she shows up. Ben has gotten so upset he's destroyed the TV, so now they can't even see Reed to help save him. So then Crystal shows up, and she has brought Triton. She's like, Triton, the swimmy guy. He's the one who can save Reed. And they're like, really, him? And it's like, going, yep. And he goes in. They're still calling the negative zone subspace sometimes. They're going back and forth. So then Triton, he's got, I guess, just a little bit of an air gun to help shoot himself around in the negative zone. And he goes ahead and rescues Reed. He manages to navigate through the zone, rescue Reed. As he does so, Blastaar escapes from the back of the asteroid, and Blastaar follows them, unfortunately, to our universe. Completely unseen by them, somehow he manages to make it through the barrier with them without ever being spotted through the portal. They're all happy. They're all hanging out. They don't see that Blastaar has managed to make it into their building and then outside of their building. And he's like, all right, I'm a criminal. I need to find another criminal. And then whoop, Sandman picks him up. And Sandman's like, oh, man, I was hoping to grab one of the Fantastic Four. And he's like, wait just a second. Are you a criminal? It's like, yes, I am. I'm a criminal. We should hang out. They're like, all right, let's work together. Although they're already planning to betray each other. So they're going to work together next issue. Finally, we have Reed and Sue tearfully reunited. We have Johnny and Crystal tearfully reunited. Alicia's not here, so Ben is bummed. And that is the end of the issue. Next issue, Blastaar. Once again, there is this rumor that the Fantastic Four falls off in quality after issue 60. Nobody has told them. This is an absolutely beautiful issue. It is great. It is great to finally get Johnny and Crystal reunited, and such a clever, ironic twist that he can't even look up to see her when she comes in because he's so distraught over Reed. I love that. I love everything about this issue. What do you think, Sue?
I thought it was great. I will echo your surprise that Blastaar predates Annihilus. I assumed that Annihilus was going to be the first villain and the always big bad villain from the Negative Zone, but apparently not. I think that Stan Lee might be trying to give himself a little bit of an out on changing the name Subspace to instead Negative Zone. There's a little bit of dialogue in here somewhere, and I don't remember exactly what panel it's in, where they're saying that Reed first started working on the Subspace issue having something to do with breaking the Inhumans out of their barrier. That seems almost like Stan Lee is like, oh man, that's right. I did sort of screw these names up, didn't I? How do I explain this? Because I don't think that the Subspace stuff earlier was shown to have anything to do with the barrier on the Great Refuge. But I'll give it to them. They at least come up with a fig leaf there to swap that name over. But overall, yeah, as you said, a fantastic issue. The visuals are just amazing. And at the very end, when everybody is tearfully reunited, Thing is sitting on a bench saying, love, yuck, it's just a lot of mush. At least that's what a slob like me has to keep telling himself. Although I wonder where Alicia is at the moment. But
yeah,
even
dude,
if
you've
Alicia,
got a girlfriend.
But even if Alicia is there, there always is the whole thing of, yeah, but he's a rocky monster, Right. Anyway, one way or the other, yes, he is feeling sorry for himself, but yes, they are sort of forgetting that Alicia is there for him to call upon.
Yes.
The last thing is that when you were talking about, like, are you a criminal? Hey, I'm a criminal too, which reminded me of the thing you used to talk about, how when we were young, they would say, oh, it's not safe to hitchhike because you'll be picked up by an axe murderer. And then they say, oh, it's not safe to pick up a hitchhiker because you might be picking up an axe murderer. So you were saying that it was like a whole axe murderer rideshare program out there on the highways.
At this point,
and
the only people left hitchhiking are serial killers, and the only people left picking them up are serial killers. And every time it's like, oh man, are you a serial killer too?
Each of them would start pulling out their axe to chop the other one to death. And they'd be like, hey, you got an axe too.
Yes. So let's go ahead and move on to Strange Tales.
It's a Doctor Strange cover here. Prepare for mysticism without end when Umar walks the earth, introducing Zom. And we see Zom from behind here. Yeah, so this is Marie Severin. You see an SEV down in the lower left-hand corner of the cover here. So we will be getting to that in a little bit. But first, Nick Fury.
I just love this cover. Maria is really great at hands. We get huge close-ups of Doc's hands here on the cover, and I think they're really beautiful. His face is maybe a little oddly inked. It's beautifully penciled, maybe inked in a way where I can't quite tell where all the shadows are coming from. I'm not crazy about Zom. Well, let's discuss this when we get to Doctor Strange. Let's go ahead and discuss S.H.I.E.L.D. first.
Let's do. So this splash page here, well, first of all, The Tribunal, featuring Hydra Unmasked, edited by Stan Lee behind locked doors, written and illustrated by Jim Steranko under top security, lettered by Sam Rosen in front of the TV. So as we discussed in the previous issue, Jim Steranko has now become the first writer, artist, auteur in modern Marvel history here. There will be more in the future, Walt Simonson, Frank Miller, John Byrne, but this is the first one, and we won't have many for quite a while after this.
Yeah.
This page, this opening splash page, Matt, does this look like any...
Wally Wood doing EC?
Thank you very much. It looks like a Wally Wood science fiction splash page in an EC comic. And I believe that Sam Rosen probably saw that as well. And the title up at the top looks very much like a title that you would see in an EC comic.
I totally agree. Sam Rosen looked at this and is like, okay, Jim Steranko is totally channeling a Hollywood EC comic, so I'm going to go ahead and use an EC font for the title of the story. And it is overwhelmingly reminiscent of a Hollywood sci-fi EC book, and it is awesome. One question I kept asking myself while reading this particular issue is, to what degree does Jim Steranko, badass, rock and roll, car theft, escape artist, felon, to what degree does he actually read comic books? And to what degree does he read other Marvel comic books? But this looks like the first page of somebody who at least loved EC comics.
Yes. Now, I do have a couple of issues with this splash page. First of all, we are supposed to be on the helicarrier, are we not?
Yes.
So this is not even low Earth orbit. This is far beyond where the space shuttle flies. Well, I guess space shuttle isn't a thing anymore. This is more like geosynchronous orbit territory here, or maybe even the moon. It is out there in outer space. And the other thing, perspective-wise, we got a problem. Steranko could have hidden the perspective problem if he hadn't put those perspective lines on the floor down here. But look at where the right foot of the foreground character who's furthest towards the background. Look at where that foot is relative to the end of the wing on that vehicle over there called the Dinosaur. What is the size of those foreground characters in comparison to the background characters, given the perspective we're looking at?
Oh, yeah, this is almost always the case with Steranko. Steranko is always sloppy with perspective. Yes, he is being very sloppy with perspective here. It doesn't make any sense. But I've come to not just expect that, but come to appreciate it about Steranko.
Okay. Well, either the foreground characters are giants or the people working on the Dinosaur are Lilliputians. And by the way, it's Dynasor with a hyphen in between them there.
Now, their next recruit is they're going to recruit mid-50s TV personality Dinosaur to join S.H.I.E.L.D., and they're going to have the Dinosaur soon. And then it's presumably going to go fight dinosaurs. So they'll have, dinosaur versus dinosaurs.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm all done. Yeah, you can go on.
Okay. Yeah, so this is so-called Agent Bronson here, who is theoretically taking the woman who they all think is Supreme Hydra down to Earth to get her looked at by a doctor. But Agent Bronson, though, is actually the real Supreme Hydra, who we are about to find out in a few pages is Baron Strucker, who survived World War II and has now taken over Hydra. Anyway, they're about to take this Dinosaur down to Earth to bring Laura Brown, is that her name?
Yes.
Down to Earth to get looked at by Earth doctors rather than the space doctors they have up here on the on the helicarrier, which once again uses helicopter blades to be in possibly geosynchronous orbit here. But yes, Agent Bronson is actually up to no good. Sitwell, meanwhile, is telling the other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents about some high-tech gadgets that he has for them, some glasses that will be X-ray vision, and then some stuff they can throw and blow up, and then some stuff that can sort of make him fade out.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, yeah, the effect.
I feel like if you're going to be writing, penciling, inking, coloring S.H.I.E.L.D., then the core sequence you have to be able to do is the looking at new gadgets sequence. That is the heart of the S.H.I.E.L.D. book is, hey, here are some new gadgets. And this sequence of Sitwell showing off these 3 new gadgets is absolutely gorgeous and is the heart and soul of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. It is absolutely wonderful. The use of Zipatone is always excellent. The invisibility pill that turns you basically into a walking, talking Zipatone man is just gorgeous.
Yes. The Dinosaur heads off and we see the 3 main S.H.I.E.L.D. agents here, Sitwell, Gabe Jones, and Dum Dum. Sitwell has a bad feeling about everything. He's like, I should be relieved. We got this done, but something's wrong. And the other 2 are thinking about how Nick is being treated and, what Hydra is going to throw at them next. But then there's a bomb that goes off at Nick Fury's quarters where he has been confined. We will find out what happened with that in a minute. Meanwhile, the Dinosaur, instead of going to its intended location, flies to some high-tech island out in the middle of the ocean called Hydra Island that looks like it's all covered in a big glass kind of bubble sort of thing, which is, right out of a Bond movie, but more sci-fi, more
Yes.
sci-fi fantasy looking. But the whole idea of, hey, here's this man-made island out in the middle of the ocean with the evil headquarters in it is very much along those lines. So he then delivers Laura Brown to them. So, and where is Nick Fury at this point? Did he hitch a ride?
He
Yes.
was hidden in the bowels
Yes.
of the ship. They knew all about Bronson, and they used this as a way to get to Hydra Island, and he was hidden in a hidden compartment in the bowels of the ship the whole time.
Right. So the other three, Sitwell, Jones, and Dum Dum, apparently were not read into this, but this was apparently the plan the entire time. And it's funny, on page 6, panel 3, is it just me, or are we starting to see the modern Nick Fury uniform come together a little bit there? Yeah. Agent Bronson then takes off his shield clothes and gets into his Hydra clothes. He has not yet taken off his mask. Well, and also on page 7, second panel, that is both awesome and a problem, in that the shot there is fantastic with the three agents on this sort of observation deck area in the observation window part on the front of the helicarrier, looking down on a grid of lights in a city, presumably like LA or something like that. And it's great, but they were just in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, they quickly descended
moments before. So then Supreme Hydra ends up putting out this broadcast to the entire world, and we see all of these different heroes hearing the demands or the address of Supreme Hydra. There's some weird groupings of heroes in here.
Yes.
Spider-Man.
This was another part where I found myself wondering, does Jim Steranko read Marvel Comics? I don't know.
All right, so Spider-Man and Daredevil, okay, they've been guest starring in each other's books lately, and Thor. Okay, well, that's a little bit weird. So we have Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, and Captain America, but then 2 panels later, we have Hulk, Iron Man, Giant Man, and Wasp. Why aren't Giant Man and Wasp over here? What? Anyway, it's really kind of weird. Supreme Hydra makes his manifesto and his threats and his demands to the world, and then heads off to get his disguise removed. Again, for Steranko pushing the boundaries of comics art stuff, splash page on page 8 is pretty neat looking.
It is more than neat looking. It is absolutely astounding. It is a blacklight poster come to life. It is absolutely insane. This sci-fi world that he finds himself involved in, sort of like the Star Blazers cartoons we grew up loving, this sort of very organic type of sci-fi that is very sort of creepy and weird and icky. It's awesome.
So we see some great shots of Nick Fury scaling a nearly flat techno wall here, getting up onto a surface and taking out a Hydra goon, and then jumping down on a whole other bunch of Hydra goons and taking them all out. And just lots of fantastic Nick Fury badassery here. Now on page 10, panel 3, he puts on these special spy ray glasses in order to see what he needs to see, sort of x-ray vision kind of stuff. But the image behind his head there is supposed to show what he's seeing, and it shows the 2 different circles meeting in the middle for what you would see in the 2 different circles of the eyepiece. Think about that for a minute and why I have a problem with this. Yes, he has only one eye. So he would only see one of those 2 images.
Excellent point.
Anyway, what did you think that I was saying?
I was reading through my notes and I was distracted, so I was just playing along.
Okay,
but
all right.
No, it hadn't occurred to me that you were. I was suddenly caught reading from my notes, and you were like, "What did you see?" And I'm like, "Oh, right, yes, I saw it too," because I was trying to hide the fact I had been distracted reading my notes. Yes, excellent point. He has one eye. He cannot see.
Yes.
He cannot see binocular vision.
Exactly. So then we get another double page spread. So this month we have 2 double page spreads in Marvel Comics. And this is a double page spread where we see that Supreme Hydra is now Baron Strucker. We see him in his Hydra uniform with his face uncovered. Nick Fury is tied down to some kind of gizmo where they are going to do some bad stuff to him. As a matter of fact, he then says, I sentence the prisoner to death by alpha particle exposure. And alpha particles actually are a real kind of nuclear radiation. There's alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha it is very easy to shield against. A sheet of printer paper will be enough to insulate you against alpha particles. However, if you get them directly at you, or even worse, you get something inside your body that is giving off alpha particles, then you are in a really bad place. So you could actually be sentenced to death by alpha particle exposure. That is a real thing. So this is a fantastic, dramatic ending to the story here.
Oh, God, yes. I should point out that Baron Strucker we have seen him in 3 different rubber masks at this point. We saw him as Don Caballero. We saw him as Amir Ali Bey. Then we saw him as Agent Bronson. And apparently this whole time, underneath all 3 of these rubber masks, he was wearing a monocle that did not cause any sort of odd bulge in his face in any of these.
How many
disguises.
times have we seen that in the Marvel universe, mask technology is way beyond our comprehension?
Yes, but this is incredible. This whole story is incredible. This is the best Stranko story we've had so far, which is saying a lot. Hydra Island is amazing. I just read to my son the 1980s comics where Captain America and a reunited Howling Commandos go to Hydra Island, which is revived, and Strucker, who is seemingly back to life. And Mike Zack had a tall order to try to recreate the coolness of this issue, and he did it. Mike Zack is one of my favorite pencilers, and he did an amazing job with Captain America 273 and 274. But this is absolutely gorgeous, obviously beginning with this wonderful tribute to Wally Wood. And then you didn't mention on page 2 when Bronson is in the ship and he briefly sees a reflection of his face, but it's reflecting his real face. So we get a little preview that it's going to be Strucker. It is absolutely incredible. Everything about this issue. The use of zip-done, these are great. So Nick Fury is going around in a gray costume. Most Marvel artists are afraid of gray, ever since the Hulk got recolored because they couldn't get the gray to reproduce well. Everyone's been afraid to use gray. Jim Stranko is not afraid of gray. He is using gray beautifully here throughout this entire book, including on the final page with a visor that is over Fury's face. And we should just talk about how ambitious this double page splash is, where you've got how many Hydra goons did he draw here? Full body Hydra goons who are giving the Heil Hydra sign here. Or I guess it's Hail Hydra. I don't want to get even more Nazi than we have to. This is such an ambitious 2-page spread. There's
probably 3 dozen full body shots back there and probably another dozen partial body drawings.
Yes. Absolutely incredible art drawing. This is one of the all-time great Marvel comics. I absolutely love it.
All right, we're going to move on to the Doctor Strange story. Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts. Umar walks the earth, introducing Zom. And we talked a moment ago about the splash page at the beginning of this issue, looking like a Wally-Wood science fiction EC comic. And this splash page has the look of an EC horror comic, with the image taking up 2/3 of the page, and then vertically going down 1/3 of the page, little insets of characters. Usually in EC, it would be like the Crypt Keeper, the Old Witch, all those sorts of things. But here it's the Ancient One and Doctor Strange giving a little bit of exposition about what has happened.
Once again, I find Umar looks very sexy, that she looks great. The New York City street looks great. It's great to see her on Earth. I'm not a big fan of the way they colored her cape. It's sort of burgundy on the inside and white on the outside. I find that odd. I wish it was burgundy on both sides, but I can't complain. This is beautiful drawing of Umar. I like the insets of the other two, although the inking is a little heavy on the other two. It looks kind of golden age, very sort of golden agey inking on Ancient One and Doctor Strange.
Well, and that to some degree almost just heightens the EC thing.
Yeah, it does.
EC was, I think it's more or less considered the end of the Golden Age, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, credits. Brand ye these necromantic names upon thy brain, O true believer, for they have truly created in thine own behalf enchantment without end. Stan Lee and Marie Severin, lettered by Artie Simek. In the previous issue, The Ancient One and Doctor Strange had banished Clea to they don't even know where, so that she was protected from Umar. Seems like an unwise plan, since they don't know whether the place they just sent Clea to was better than her fate here. They have no idea, and no idea how to get her back. Obviously, it's going to happen at some point. But then right after that,
I think the idea is that it can't be worse.
But they don't know. That's
True.
what I'm saying. And then the Ancient One turned around and banished Doctor Strange away from the Earth, saying that Umar walks the Earth, you will be defeated, I am going to send you away, so you will not have to face this, which seemed like an odd choice. But what the Ancient One was doing was sending Doctor Strange off to revive Zom, who, almost seems like a Lovecraftian Ancient One
Yeah.
in a way. And we're going to see more of him in a bit. But Umar comes to Earth. She is in the middle of Times Square, and all of the people around her, she doesn't like them. And so she makes them all disappear. We don't know where they went. We don't know if they're dead. We do not know if they have been sent to their homes, if they're in some other dimension. We don't know. On the bottom of page 2, I love those two panels, particularly the inking, but everything about them.
I don't agree. I say in my notes, all of page 2 is pretty sloppy. I mean, the drawing of the Ancient One on the bottom left, you find that to be a great drawing. I find that to be very dashed in. But I mean, I guess that could be good.
Yeah, I mean, no, I love the stylistic look of that one. He's standing on the top of a low mountain. You see some other higher mountains behind him. He just has his robes billowing around him. And yeah, it is a kind of almost impressionistic look with just broad strokes of the shadows on his robes. The figure drawing of him with his cloak actually looks way more modern than this book. It really reminds me of, well, and actually several things in this issue remind me a lot of the heyday of Vertigo.
Yeah.
Vertigo being the imprint at DC Comics that I did a fair amount of work at, and had a lot of mystical and adult-oriented, mystical, magical horror kind of stuff. And it really reminds me of drawings of The Sandman, or even some stuff that Todd McFarlane did. It looks very modern, and I really like that impressionistic kind of dashed-in look that you were talking about. And on the last panel of page 2, the effect of sort of the bubble that Doctor Strange is in is unique, and I find fascinating. It's kind of almost like another take on Kirby Crackle, but looks entirely original.
Yeah. No, I do like it.
So those are the two things that I noticed about that I wanted to call out. So anyway, we might disagree on the second to last panel in this page, but I really enjoyed it. So Doctor Strange goes to the place where Zom is imprisoned. We see that he is about to let him free, but meanwhile, Wong feels the impression of impending evil coming towards him. Umar approaches the Sanctum Sanctorum, consents that Doctor Strange is not there, so she just disappears the building.
Well, she doesn't disappear it. She crumples it up.
She crumples it, but in the next panel, there's nothing. There's nothing left.
They make it very clear that Wong is inside the building. He is looking out the window. And then they show just a great panel of her crumpling up the building like a piece of loose leaf paper. It is just, I'm like, poor Wong. That looks like a horrific way to die. Oh my God.
And
then you end up with, not even a smoking pile of rubble, a smoking hole in the ground.
Yeah, I guess the thing that reminds me of actually was from the first Ant-Man movie, where Yellow Jacket ends up crumpling down into nothing. Yeah, that's actually really what it brings up, but it's a fantastic and affecting panel. So Umar is then about to vaporize the entire city of New York. She says, with one simple incantation, I shall cause such carnage that men will speak of it for 1,000 years to come. But then she's just like, no, you know what? I'm going to go get the Ancient One first. Right? So we just avoided a Holocaust by just the whim of what Umar wanted to do. She says on the top of page 5, no matter where the aged Ancient One may be, Umar's bolt of bedevilment shall find him, which I find quite entertaining.
And then we get a great panel where she's just like literally like, I'm going to shoot a ray straight at the Ancient One. Well, wait, you're in New York and he's in Tibet. Yep, I'm going to shoot it through the earth from New York to Tibet. And you see this little cutaway of her bolt going through the core of the earth from New York to Tibet. I'm like, okay, that's one way to do it, man. I guess if your aim is good enough, go ahead and take that shot.
So the Ancient One plummets through this thing. We then go back to see what's going on with Doctor Strange. He is doing all sorts of black magic to revive Zom. And on the bottom of page 6, we see Zom for the first time. So I think that you were mentioning at some point in our discussions, Matt, how the one thing you find disappointing in this issue is the character design for Zom. Is that correct? Did I remember that correctly?
I mean, I'm way back and forth about Zom. Like, I'm not a big fan of the name Zom. I'm not a big fan of his clothes, certainly. In terms of being a big furry guy like Chewbacca with no chin, necklace Chewbacca, I go back and forth because I love his eye shackles, his huge metal gnarled blindfold. I love his hand shackles. I totally can't decide about Zom. You know, when I first read these comics, my general impression is that after Ditka left, the book became too golden agey. I felt that way about the Everett issues, and I also felt that way about the Marie Severin issues. And I feel like Zom feels like a golden age creature. He almost feels like a Fletcher Hanks creature to a certain extent, which is a compliment coming from me, even though Fletcher Hanks is considered to be one of the worst comic book creators of all time. I love Fletcher Hanks, and I love his character design. And there's something a little Fletcher Hanksy about Zom. Would you agree to that?
I don't see that, but I'm not going to argue against it. What it actually looks like to me a little bit, and this is going back to the whole Vertigo thing, is John Ridgway or maybe Mike Dringenberg or something like that.
Yeah.
So once again, to me, that feels actually quite modern. So it's interesting that you're seeing a lot of golden age look in a lot of these things. And some of that I can see as well, but I'm seeing a lot more, of the sort of maturing comics of our youth in the late 80s. One way or the other, Zom, yes, he is a furry dude who is wearing kind of a tunic, but sleeveless, and shorty shorts. And he's got this blindfold on that just looks nuts. It wraps around his head and then seems to have little claws or teeth sticking out from it as it goes around. It looks to some degree like a double-sided crown that has slipped down onto his eyes. His nostrils are as far apart as his eyes might be, or nearly so, and his hands are shackled in these, once again, unique-looking shackles. Do not look like any other shackles I have seen in comics before, but there's flame coming out of those shackles. So yeah, just a unique look. Whether you like it or hate it, it is unique.
Yes, I will certainly give it that. Although Zom is not a very unique name. Zom is sort of a generic comic book mystical creature name. That's presumably Stan Lee. Marie Severin is doing her part. She has given him a very unique look.
Yes. So on the top of page 7, I just love the textures that Marie Severin is bringing into that panel. Gorgeous, luscious textures on the pedestal that Zom is sitting on the empty area behind that pedestal on the left, the texture of his fur. I just really like a lot of stuff about that panel. So Doctor Strange removes his mask of blindness and then is going to cause Zom to follow him in a moment. Umar somehow pulls the Ancient One to Stonehenge. It becomes clear that the Ancient One banished Dormammu eons ago, basically, and so she is going to take her revenge on him now that he is an old, feeble man, even though he still has powerful magic. But right as she banishes the Ancient One somewhere, or he escapes, one way or the other, he disappears right at the moment that Doctor Strange appears with Zom behind him, and he makes it clear that he was luring Zom here with the thought that Zom wanted to kill him, but the hope was as soon as he laid eyes on Umar, he would want to kill her. Then he says, "It was your brother, Dormammu, who bound my hands with the chains of living bondage before eternity imprisoned me." So apparently he was imprisoned by more or less a cooperation between Dormammu and eternity, which is an interesting wrinkle in these things. But then
that's a very high-class pedigree of imprisonment. The two baddest badasses imprisoned you. So, you get to put that on your resume.
Umar is able to, as you often say, nope out of there as soon as she sees this. And right at that moment, Zom breaks his shackles, and the Ancient One and Doctor Strange are like, okay, well, we got him to scare off Umar. Now we have a bigger problem. What are we going to do with this? And Zom just says, prepare to die. And next, the end of the Ancient One. So yeah, an interesting chapter in our ongoing story here, and art that is well worth having a discussion or argument about. Let's say that, no matter what one thinks of some of the character designs or some of the other stuff in here.
Yes, certainly.
What say you?
This is a great issue. We're very lucky to have Marie Severin and Stan Lee working together so well on this comic. Even Zom's little booties, I'm not sure about a lot of stuff about Zom.
Oh yeah, I hadn't even noticed that. They're like, they go over his toes and the fronts of his feet, but there's no heel on them, and it just has a strap that goes around the back of the heel.
Basically, they're Crocs.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't even noticed that.
But this is a great issue. Poor Wong. When I read comics in the 80s, Wong was still alive. Wong sure looks dead as hell in this issue. And the Sanctum Sanctorum looks gone as hell, because at the end, Umar is like, never again shall I leave the Dark Dimension. I'm getting out of here. And it's like, wait, before you go, restore my house and my servant, my poor servant. All right, let's move on to Tales of Suspense number 89, featuring Iron Man and Captain America, the monstrous menace of the new mysterious Melter on the cover. We see, the Melter's back, looking a lot like he used to look. They keep talking about how he's got a new look in this issue, but it's not very new.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look at a previous appearance to see what changed. I'm sure something did, but it's not obvious.
Changed. So this month is very much the month of two Gene Cohens. So we saw Gene Cohen penciling and presumably co-plotting Daredevil this month, inked by Dick Ayers, although Dick Ayers' name seems to have been added to the comic at the last minute, implying that maybe they didn't hire an inker until the last minute, and maybe those things were rushed. Well, here we get Gene Colan with his much better inker. It will be still about a year until Gene Colan finally gets to meet his best inker, who is Tom Palmer, but not very far behind is Frank Giacoya, who used to be called Frankie Ray and now inks under his real name, Frank Giacoya. And boy, oh boy, this is such a beautifully inked issue. I can appreciate so much more after reading that Daredevil. And that starts with this splash page. The Invincible Iron Man, the monstrous menace of the mysterious Melter. We've got Tony Stark looking very handsome in a red mock turtleneck and a brown leather jacket with a white fleece lining. And he looks very handsome, very suave, very 1967.
He looks suave and deboner.
Handsome face. And he is saying, all right, we're rebuilding my factory. I like that they actually acknowledge the fact that the factory did not survive what happened last issue, getting sucked down into the earth and then nuked. So
yeah, there's not much coming back from that. Although I guess tell that to the Mole Man. He is going to be coming back from that.
Well, okay, tell that to Doctor Strange, whose house seemingly survived what we just saw it go through. Happy and Pepper stop by just long enough to have suddenly a huge bunch of rocks dumped on their heads. And well, it's dumped on all three of them. It's dumped on Pepper, Happy, and Tony. Pepper gets herself out of the rocks first and says, "Oh, Happy, please answer me." And Tony's like, "What about me? Why wasn't she concerned about all the rocks that have been dumped on my head? Why was she only concerned about Happy? Hello? I guess she really loves Happy." Oh, well, there's only one solution to that. He's like, "I gotta go bang a lot of chicks." And for the first time in this book in many years, he decides to become a swinging playboy again. And there is a beautiful montage on page 4 of him out with a lot of hot chicks. Although the one who gets the full shot in the center, is more of a plainer girl, I would say. But the others,
I think she's dressed much more plainly. She's dressed a little bit more, I don't know if I'd quite go so far as frumpy, but certainly when you compare her to the go-go dancer in the upper left-hand corner, which is just, I could look at that figure all day. The energy of the dancing, her head, as she's shaking it there, she's flipped her head completely to her right shoulder, and her red hair is actually covering most of her face. You only see the shadow of her chin underneath. I mean, that's a beautiful
Her hair is whipping one way, and her pearl necklace is whipping the other way. That's a great way of indicating that she's really shaking it. But I should say that figure can mean two different things. You said you could look at that figure all day. Figure can mean a drawing of a person, or it can mean somebody's body shape.
Figure drawing.
Anyway, Tony is on the town. He is playing what's it called?
playing the field.
Playing the field. Then he's with yet another girl on the next page. I guess two girls on the next page. I thought, does he get her name wrong? I don't remember.
He calls her a name and she's like, oh, well, actually, you should remember my name is this other name. But she seems to be like, well, but I'm with the most eligible bachelor in the world, so I will let him forget my name and not get upset.
Yes. And then there's a note from Stanley. We know what you're thinking, frantic one. If you wanted a love story, you wouldn't read Iron Man. But as soon as we get the next couple of panels that we're with, things will start picking up. You can bet your transistors on it. Signed, Loverboy Lee. Again, him sort of complaining about the art, which he should not do because this is gorgeous art. And once again, calling people frantic. Just so strange. I saw that you shared Mark Evanier made a list of different levels of Marvel fan around this time. And of course, it has to include the word frantic. And RFO is a real frantic one, a buyer of at least 3 Marvel mags a month.
Yeah, I didn't know that Mark Evanier was involved in any of this stuff at that point in time. But yeah,
No.
It was somebody on one of the Facebook groups. It's actually, I think, the 1961 to 1989 group I also post up to. The person's name is Paul Coyle. It's fascinating.
Meanwhile, we cut to a prison. They don't feel the need to have Iron Man unconsciously passing by the prison in order to cut to the prison like they do in Spider-Man. Here, they trust the reader to just make the jump. Again, gorgeous art. These two look like they must be based on real people or perhaps movie character actors. But we have the Melter in prison with a very distinctive face and his cellmate also with a distinctive face. This is very similar to the story we read in Spider-Man, where you had one cellmate exploiting the other one in order to get some sort of technical device. A similar thing happens. This time the Melter ends up with his guns back. Once again, promises the other guy he'll help him escape, but instead clobbers him on the head, melts his way out of prison, changes into a Melter outfit that they keep saying is very different from the old Melter outfit, but it looks pretty much the same to me.
And he says as he escapes, now all I gotta do is dig up the extra costume I hid, which once again is exactly what happened with the Vulture. Right?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, okay, that's where it's buried. I need to dig it up. This really makes it feel like this month Stan Lee was taking more of the reins on the plotting and just ended up recycling the same plot, because it would be extremely coincidental for both Gene Colan and John Romita to come up with this completely duplicated sequence.
Well, you never know. It could, as always, it could be seen either way. On the one hand, it's like, well, clearly this is Stan writing the books because he used the same plot twice in 1 month. Or you could say, well, clearly Stan wasn't writing the books because he wouldn't have used the same plot twice in 1 month. That must happen because different people were writing them. The Melter fights Iron Man. He's saying that he needs to do this so that he can get smaller transistorized lasers, but it turns out he has them because Iron Man is reaching for his face at one point, and then it turns out that Melter has tiny little lasers built into his helmet that are pretty cool. Iron Man realizes he has to get away from the Melter, gets inside his factory, changes back to Tony Stark, but whoops, there's the Melter. He has come in and has the drop on Tony Stark. What are you going to do? Next issue, a Golden Ghost. What thoughts did you have on this issue, Steve?
Yeah, I liked the art in this one. Well, I did notice that on the initial splash page, they get Senator Byrd's name wrong. They call him Senator Boyd, which reminds me of the opening line of Red Harvest. Is that the name of the book? The Dashiell Hammett book?
My favorite first line of a novel of all time. I first heard Personville called Poisonville by a red-haired mucker named Hickey Dewey in the big shop in Butte, but he was also the sort of man who called a shirt a shoit.
So anyway, Senator Byrd being called Senator Boyd definitely reminded me of that. You know, we didn't think of that line when we were doing our whole thing over Thanksgiving weekend about adding, and that's when the murders began, after the end of an opening line of a novel. Although in that one, that would not really be changing the novel much at all. There's a lot of murder in that.
Yes.
On page 2, I just find that Happy has just been transformed even more than earlier into just a super handsome young man, which is just not what made Happy an interesting, fun character. He is supposed to be an old, pug-ugly prize fighter with cauliflower ears. He's not this like stylish, handsome, dashing young man. That really does bother me, just since I really loved the original Happy, and this is not him. I do notice that when Stark is, sowing his wild oats as it is, well, clearly he is not actually having sex with any of these women because he's got a metal,
Well, I don't know. There used to be the sense that he can't actually have sex with women anymore because he's hiding the fact he's got a metal breastplate. But now he was exposed on the floor of Congress as having a metal breastplate. So now all these women presumably know this. It's not necessarily a metal codpiece. It's a metal breastplate. You can, I'm not going to say whether or not I've ever made love to a man who was wearing a metal breastplate, but I'm just saying it's possible.
I do not want to picture the whole thing of him Winnie the Pooh in it there. That is not, well, it's an image I've now put in everybody else's head, so you're welcome. Right there on page 5, he really is looking kind of haggard. Like this is not something that is actually invigorating to him, that this is something that is exhausting him, which I find an interesting idea and well executed by Colin to bring that kind of thing across. Let's see, I had one more note here. Let me see what that said. Oh, wow, it happens in a couple of points. Last panel on page 7. Tony Stark has his helmet off. Look at his ears.
That's interesting.
And that's not the only time that happens in this issue. It was actually the other time that caught my eye, which is on the final page of this story, first panel. Again, he has that off, and it is very clear in that panel that it's not like the back half of his helmet is still
Well, we
on.
should explain. I thought you were going to explain.
Sorry. Yes, please explain to the listeners what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Tony is still wearing his Iron Man earmuffs when he's got the rest of his helmet off. And you can see on the helmet that the earmuffs are now missing, and they're still on Tony's head. It's almost as if he's listening to bright red Beats headphones.
Or wearing the headset that I am wearing at this very moment. What it kind of reminded me of a little bit is on Star Trek Next Generation, Geordi's visor, where he's got those little flashing nodules on his temples that the visor clicks into. That's almost like what they're implying here on this, that he adheres those to his ears first and then goes ahead and snaps his helmet onto the rest of it. Overall, this is an okay story. As you said, there are some fantastic art moments in here. The Melter isn't that interesting a character. We have, once again, a repeat of the plot point, and we have Tony's strange earmuffs. So a mixed bag, but it's got some stuff to recommend it.
He's not a very interesting character, but he does have a lot of character in his face in this issue, like really fantastic faces throughout the issue. This is one of the best issues Colin has done, I would say, in his run at Marvel. Really gorgeous. Giacoya has really got the hang of it. I'll just point out one last thing. I really liked on page 7 when the Melter is melting through the bars of his prison cell. It's made clear that the place where the bars are melting, the white hot place where the bars are melting, is the light source in the room, which, as you recall, is a big pet peeve of mine when you've got bright flames in an issue and it's not the light source in the room. So kudos to both Colin and Giacoya for having the white hot flame actually be the light source for once. All right, let's go and talk about the back half of the book with Captain America, Living Legend of World War II, Back from the Dead, an agonizing action-packed extravaganza by Smilin' Stan Lee and gregarious Gil Kane. So in the past, it's been Stan Lee and me and Gil Sugar Lips Kane. Now it's Smilin' Stan Lee and gregarious Gil Kane, lettered by Sam Rose and kibitzed by Irving Forbush. So we have Captain America confronting, who is the shock surprise villain? It turns out it's the Red Skull. It's always the Red Skull. And he confronts the Red Skull on the first page. And the Red Skull is always wearing slight variations of his outfit. Now he's wearing basically his green jumpsuit, but with a big white cravat. Would that be a big white neck scarf?
Yeah, definitely a cravat. Yes.
And white gloves. Right away, looking at Red Skull on this first page, the Red Skull looks like he was inked with marker, which is interesting, which you were talking about is a reputation Gil Kane would have later.
I actually don't see that. This looks like it's actually using more brush than usual in that those heavy blacks that we're getting there. Obviously, that had to be filled in with a brush.
Well, right.
Which parts are you talking about?
The cracky lines on his face.
Sure. Doesn't jump out at me as out of place for Kane. Yeah, that didn't jump out at me, but okay.
The Red Skull goes ahead and reviews how he survived falling into the ocean with the Cosmic Cube, and it's believable enough. Sure, why not? And then he puts Captain America in a little bubble, lowers the bubble down to, I guess this is a beach? No, it's not.
It's like some dungeon or something.
Gil Kane never really does much scene setting here, so it's not quite clear where he is. But somewhere there's a big metal wall, so a rather generic-looking robot comes out of the wall, has a rather generic-looking fight with Captain America. But then, once Captain America gets to be the robot, Red Skull's like, okay, now time for the real main attraction. I'm going to have Bucky attack you. I had feared that they would completely forget that the whole impetus for this story was trying to find out if Bucky was still alive, but they did not forget. Bucky comes out, takes off his little domino mask to prove it's really him, and then says, "You never bothered searching for me for all these years that I've been alive, and how dare you?" This will later turn out to be actually true. And that then Bucky starts beating up Captain America, telling him all these things that Captain America doesn't want to hear. And finally, Captain America realizes, like, dude, you are a robot, and I'm tired of listening to you, and busts him open, breaks him down into robot parts. And then Red Skull's like, okay, time for my third attempt to kill you, which we will see next issue. Cap's guilt over Bucky is a good story driver. This is a good way to evince more of those feelings. And that's all we really need from this issue. The robot is very generic and lame. It just takes up a few pages. But the Cap Bucky fight is meaty and juicy and all sorts of other words that involve food. I enjoyed it. What did you think?
It's medium rare. Overall, I really like it. I mean, you can't really go very wrong with a Captain America fighting Red Skull and having something to do with his legacy of having lost Bucky. Putting all that together is not going to be a bad idea. I will just point out some little things that I saw. On page 4, where he's having his generic fight with the generic robot, the middle panel, the middle of the page, that is just about as Gil Kane as you can get. The only thing is he hadn't really gotten his penchant for noses that were always either turned way up or turned way down. But his position in there, the figure drawing, is just classic Kane. So when the Red Skull has this little missile that he sends to go and menace Captain America, at one point it ends up swinging around and around and around him, kind of orbiting him. And Captain America is thinking, so I won't know when it'll attack. My only chance is to strike at his Achilles heel, his mad, unholy pride. And I'm sitting here thinking, dude, you have a shield. Just stick it out. Just move your arm. And something about that Cap figure reminds me a little bit of the figure of Cap on the cover of Secret Wars 2, #1, which for some reason has always seared itself into my brain, largely because that cover was just so freaking awesome. And then you open the cover and it's like, oh, this is Secret Wars 2. This is the Secret Wars 2 that we came to know and loathe. During the fight with Bucky on page 9, Bucky says, "You're an old man now. You can't hold me like that." And it's like, no, if this were actually Bucky, Bucky would be older than Captain America by now. They just can't remember the fact that he didn't age during those 18 years or whatever it is. And then the first panel on page 10, that is an extremely powerful panel, but we have already seen a very, very similar panel of Captain America in one of the Jack Kirby books. I think it was when he was fighting Batroc. And I know that I have seen on the Comics Swipes Facebook group, somebody had 3 separate panels that all looked not quite identical, but extremely similar, with this really weird pose of this overhand sideways punch where your whole body is horizontal. Yeah, so this is an interesting and sometimes repeated position.
So the third panel on page 7 with Bucky pointing at us, the lines are way too thick. That totally looks like it was inked with a laundry marker. Well, he's yelling, "Captain America, I realize now you were jealous of me."
So here's the way I see that. I don't see that as necessarily the lines on his face being too thick, but of there not being enough differentiation of the planes between where his hand is pointing out at us, which is clearly going to be 2.5 feet or so closer to us than the face, but it has the same line weights as the face does.
Yeah.
Again, Gil Kane's inking style, while it did irritate some people, never irritated me. I kind of like that stylistic choice of those blunt lines that he's got on his face. I just do wish that he'd done more differentiation, whether through different line thicknesses or there are other strategies an inker can use. So I see what you're talking about. I have a different interpretation of it. I had one more thing to say. In the letters page, there is a letter from a Frank Kessler that says, I've noticed that Cap seems to own an almost supernatural shield. It is never scratched flying through the air from the onslaught of all types of ultramodern weapons, nor is it bent or mutilated in any way. Why? What is it made of? Who made the shield? How much does it weigh? Why doesn't it leave any mark when it glances off a wall? Which I find an interesting set of questions. And once again, they curate what letters they put in here. And I wonder if this gave them the idea to start coming up with an interesting backstory for the shield, or whether they already were and were using this to kind of tease that. And tease it they do. He'd said, look, seriously, don't joke about this. I really want to know these answers. So they say, no answers in joke form, eh? Okay, Frankie, we'll do you one better than that. We'll give you no answers in any form at all. But it's because it says, your letter has given us an idea. Your questions are so interesting that we'll try to schedule a yarn for an upcoming ish in which we actually show the origin of Cap's shield, as well as answering some personal questions about Winghead himself. Given the fact that Cap's shield in the comics at the point when we were reading them as kids, and certainly up till now, is one of the most iconic objects of the entire Marvel universe. And this seems to be a moment when they are about to start making it so.
Yeah. Well, when he says it's almost supernatural, of course, I think of the great Spider-Man line from Captain America Civil War, where he says, wow, that thing does not obey the laws of physics at all, which is entirely true.
Yes. All right. So now let's go ahead and move on to the final issue of the month, which, I guess this is mine, isn't it?
This is yours.
All right. So the Avengers, suddenly the Submariner. And we have a not that great Heck Russo's cover. The Avengers are surveying the chaos that happened to their headquarters after their fight with, Hammerhead, Thunderboot, and Piledriver, along with the Mad Thinker. Oh, it's good to acknowledge that this is going to have some consequences. Oh, by the way, Stan Lee pontifically presents and presides over a Roy Thomas Don Heck majestic maritime masterwork, inked in sub-oceanic splendor by George Bell, lettered in a brimful bubble bath by Sam Rosen.
So it's interesting that you have Don Heck and Roy Thomas sort of co-credited with this issue without saying who was the writer and who was the artist, which they hadn't been doing with Roy. They'd only been doing that with Stan. And yeah, going back, it was the same way with X-Men this month. Roy Thomas, Werner Roth, cataphonically cataclysmic co-production. So even with Roy now, they're not saying who's the writer and who's the artist.
In a caption on the splash page, Roy Thomas says, seldom has such a cataphonic conflict been so clamorously craved, and seldom has even magniloquent Marvel so cogently and creatively complied. Enough said. Magniloquent, I actually had to go look up. I know many words that are similar to that, but I didn't. But basically, magniloquent means using high blown, over the top, bombastic language. And I'm like, okay, yep, tracks. We're good. That is indeed the word you would need to describe Marvel in this age. So they're trying to go ahead and clean up around here. It becomes clear that Scarlet Witch was injured more than anybody had realized in the previous issue. There was a moment when the Mad Thinker caused her hex power to essentially backfire on her, and she is not doing well. Yeah, we just see that the Black Widow is still doing her spy stuff, and no one's in the loop on it, and we see this top secret plane she has stolen is from the same base where General Ross and Major Talbot are, that base that they're on, which means Major Talbot is even worse at his job of base security. Yes. Just come on, people. The Submariner, meanwhile, we suddenly switch to him, apropos of nothing. He is having basically a workout with some of his greatest fighters in his principality here. He is routing them, of course, because he is superpowered and they are not, so it doesn't really seem like a good idea. It just so happens that an American nuclear sub is coming to this area to test some new weapon. It seems to be just complete coincidence that they show up at Atlantis. But one way or the other, the Submariner goes out to stop this missile from hitting his people. We have a really unfortunate looking panel on panel 2 of page 6. Actually reminds me a little bit of the ambiguously gay duo.
Yes.
The American Navy sees this going on and is like, oh, Submariner is attacking our stuff. We need to go deal with them. So they end up in a conflict. The Avengers get a radio broadcast from Captain America. Now, this, we've often talked about how Avengers usually happens after all of the other issues in a month. Here, this is far enough after that this is referencing something that's going to be happening in next month's comics.
Yes.
It says you need to read Tales of Suspense number 90 and says, you haven't read that yet? For shame, frantic one. Yeah, it hasn't come out yet, dude. Don't shame me. Anyway, this has to do with Cap and his whole thing going on with Red Skull.
He says, by the way, it looks like I'm working for the Red Skull now, but I'm not. Oh, and by the way, several months ago, the last time I fought the Red Skull, the cosmic cube dropped in the ocean. It now occurs to me in the middle of everything that's going on. I should have told you a long time ago, many months ago, that you should go scoop that up and take care of it. And I just forgot. And now I'm going to do it now. And the vendors are like, okay, now you tell us.
Oh, right. That extremely dangerous object. Maybe we should do something about that.
Which, as it turns out, they should not have, because it's really fascinating. This whole issue, the Avengers create the whole problem here. Yeah, we've wondered why they didn't just invite Hercules to join the team. Well, in this issue, we find out, because it turns out he's dumb as a box of rocks, and he creates the whole problem in this issue.
I do not think anybody has ever accused Hercules of being super smart. So the Submariner follows the nuclear sub back to its base so he could confront the powers that be that sent this nuclear sub presumably to attack Atlantis, even though that's not exactly what it was supposed to be doing. And it just so happens that this base is on the same island where the Red Skull fell into the sea with the cosmic cube. Coincidence of coincidences. The Avengers arrive at this island to confront the Submariner. And yes, as you said, Hercules says something about like, no, Submariner, you will not be able to get the cosmic cube, which will give you incredible power. And Submariner, who is smart, unlike Hercules, is like, I have no idea what they're talking about, but that sounds like something I should have. So I will play along and pretend that I am looking for this thing. Giant Man, though, realizes that this was not what was going on and is really, really unhappy with Hercules, as he should be. Page 15, we get some particularly bad George Russo's inking in panels 2 and 3 in particular. Some of the texturing on what looks like maybe a big piece of coral or something like that. There's just no brush control going on there at all. The Submariner at this point is like, I'll command the fish to go and look for this thing, and they finally feel the power emanating from it, and Submariner is able to excavate it from the muck. And now Submariner has all the powers of the cosmic cube. He's using it to create fantastical aquatic creatures that come out of the sea and attack the Avengers on his behalf. So he's giving the Avengers a real run for their money. And the Avengers can't figure out that he has the cosmic cube. They figure he must because of what he's doing, but they don't see where he can have it because he's just wearing his little shorty shorts like usual. So where would you put that thing? Now, you could ask Kazar because he has apparently a little pouch in his shorty shorts that he's able to put a medallion into. But in this case, Submariner had turned the cosmic cube into a medallion because it can manipulate reality. Why can't it manipulate itself? So Wasp actually figures this out. Oftentimes we complain about how the women in these books are treated as though they can't come up with good ideas of how to use their powers and have to be told by the men. In this case, she figures it out and she doesn't tell somebody else so they can fix it. She figures it out and then breaks the chain and the thing falls off and disappears down into a crevasse that Submariner had created as part of this whole fight and disappears. It's not gone back into the sea. No one knows quite where it's gone. The crevasse heals itself after the cosmic cube is not being wielded anymore. And it falls all the way down into the part of the Earth where the Mole Man is, where, once again, coincidence of coincidences, the Mole Man happens to be at that exact location when it comes down in. And I saw this at the time. I was like, oh no, this is not good news. But then the Mole Man is just like, what's this thing? And just tosses it over his shoulder like trash. And I'm like, I don't know, that could have been a really interesting story there.
But it's nice and ironic.
Yes.
I liked having a little ironic ending in which he's got the most powerful object in the world, and he's like, what's this stupid surface world trash? And he throws it out.
Yes. And then we see that next issue, the Avengers are going to be fighting Diablo and the Dragon Man. So we end on the Mole Man, who is clearly the very first Fantastic Four villain. And then in the next issue, the Avengers are going to be fighting 2 other Fantastic Four villains. Now, did you tell me that next issue is going to be the first John Buscema issue or the last Don Heck issue?
This is the last regular Don Heck issue. This book has been in the wilderness for 32 issues. Kirby's last issue was issue 8. We've had Don Heck on this book from issue 9 to issue 40. It has been brutal. He has never done a good job on this book. Certainly, George Bell is doing him no favors, and it is over. I say it's over. Heck will return, I think, 2 times in the 40s, and he will unfortunately do the annual, which is just a shame because I think it would have been an excellent annual under Buscema's pencils. But hey, let's be grateful we can get what we get. Buscema will be officially the regular penciler from this point on, even though he will have to take some issues off. And hoo boy, are we going to have a complete revolution in this book next issue. So this terribly penciled and inked issue is thankfully the end of that 32 issue run in the wilderness.
Yeah. So I was just going back and looking at my notes, and I did have a few other specifics to mention here. At one point, Roy Thomas calls Quicksilver the Quixotic Quicksilver, which I'm like, okay, the alliteration I like, but he is not at all quixotic. I do not see,
No.
Unless you could just say he's tilting at things. Okay, maybe. And on that same page where he's called quixotic, is towards the beginning of the book, I don't remember the exact page number, we get just some poor visual storytelling from Don Heck. The bottom 4 panels on page 2. Look, you're not telling a story here. I'm looking at this visually, and if I don't read the words, I have zero idea what's going on. The 5th panel on the page is supposed to be Quicksilver pointing out, aha, I moved so quickly that I was able to go ahead and consolidate all that junk, in just a moment, and now I can move on to other tasks. And then the next panel, it is not clear. You would need to see where Hawkeye and Quicksilver were, maybe pointing to the thing, and see this isolated, consolidated piece of trash with other non-destroyed stuff around it or something like that. It just makes no visual sense whatsoever. And since this is going to be my last opportunity, my final opportunity, as you said, Don Heck is just not suited to a team book. Okay, so there's also a panel where Giant Man shrinks to ant size and is hanging on to Jan's ankles as she flies out of the Avengers Aero car. She says, not that I mind you hitching a ride, High Pockets, but why don't you give yourself the power to gain wings when you shrink? He says, I've been so busy on other projects, I never thought about it. Maybe I will one of these days. And of course he will. He will become Yellow Jacket in the not too far distant future, isn't it?
No, not that far.
That is all I have to say about this. Not a great issue, but gave us some stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty bad. A couple more things. Wasp refers to having a sting in this issue, and she's sort of flying around and stinging people. I feel like that's changed meaning in terms of what it is. Remember, she had an air gun for a while? Well, she doesn't have an air gun here. It looks like the Wasp sting is just literally a needle that is tied to her wrist that then she attempts to sting some air with, and the needle just crumples up, of course. So that's not an effective weapon there, Wasp. In the future, she will actually have lasers she can shoot from her hands.
Remember, she used to have, whenever she shrunk, she would just sort of pick up from somewhere a little like sewing needle or push pin or something like that. So this is basically going back to that, but it's just strapped to her wrist.
Yeah, it's quite strange. So I should say that when I was a kid, I lived in Atlanta, Georgia, where there were no earthquakes. And I was like, if I lived in LA. If I lived in someplace where there are earthquakes, there would be an earthquake. And the big problem is that a fissure would open up under my feet and I would fall into the earth. I thought that was the danger of earthquakes. I didn't understand this whole concept of like buildings crumble when the world shakes. I didn't understand that. I just thought it was fissures.
I think you got that from the Superman movie.
Yeah, that's true. Or I think there were lots of things with fissures being the danger from earthquakes. So all my old childhood fears were re-triggered by seeing the fissure open up next to Submariner here. All right, Steve, this was Good Month of Marvel Comics. We had a lot of great books this month. Avengers was not good, but it was the most wonderful issue of all in that it was Heck's last issue, which makes it especially wonderful. And everything else was pretty good.
It's the most wonderful issue of all. Okay, thank you everybody out there for listening, and for those of you who made comments about our absence and our explanation of our absence on Facebook and whatnot. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we will be coming back at you in another couple of weeks. So thank you very much. Take care, and as always, stay safe out there.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.